much to love about autumn that's not scary. Cool, crisp weather, pumpkin spice everything, fun family activities like hay rides and apple picking. But for me, I love to be scared, but only in a very controlled setting, such as my living room or the movie theater. Every year brings a new crop of horror to screens, big and small, some silly, some gory, and all of it meant as fun seasonal entertainment. And yet, some parts of it never seem to change. We are treated to reinventions of the same tropes: vampires, werewolves, witches, demonic possession, and deals with the devil. It's that last one that we're going to focus on this morning. Most religious traditions had some form of demons. These were beings of chaos and destruction, nature spirits that explained the uncertainty and fear of the tooth and claw of the natural world. They were often paired opposites of beings of good and light, and elaborate rituals grew up around the desire to enlist the help of the light to defeat and protect against the darkness. As religions became codified, their notions of the characteristics of such beings and their relative power also became organized. Humans created elaborate hierarchies of angelic and demonic beings, gods and goddesses. Our spiritual ancestors in the Abrahamic faiths were no different. Here we find the story of an angel that thought he could rule the cosmos as well as God himself. He and his fellow rebels were cast out of heaven, but still holding the powers granted to the angels, they set about to undermine God among his most beloved creations, mankind. Given the name Satan, or simply the devil, he was considered to be the prince of the earthly plane, and the battle for the immortal human soul was on. Now, here our story takes a bit of a turn. For here, the devil leverages God's gift of free will. He tells the half-truths and outright lies. He employs trickery and stokes egos. He encourages humans to join his rebellion and be their own gods. Eve, why should God have all the knowledge in the universe? Don't you think you deserve that for yourself? Jesus, you're the Son of God. Don't you think you should have power over all the nations of the world as your Father does? These images of temptation, Eve's pride, Jesus' desire for power, maybe, in my very low Christology. These images infused Christian storytelling as the teachings of the church, and then the institution of the church took root around the world. In theater, in puppet shows, in music, and in art, again and again, we see Satan or his minions tempting biblical humans to disregard the limitations set for them by a loving parental God and give in to their basest desires. And by the 9th century of the Common Era, we see the beginnings of a story formula that will be told and retold to our present day. It's the story of a man who is bored and dissatisfied with his lot in life. He's moderately successful, but his life lacks excitement, It's the story of a man who wants more. More knowledge, more wealth, more fame, more power. He wants eternal youth, or at least unassailable health. He wants the love of a beautiful woman, or what he thinks is love. He cannot satiate his desires by his own efforts, and so he agrees to trade his soul to Satan at the end of his life, agreeing to an eternal afterlife in the fires of hell to have everything he longs for in this earthly one. This is the story of Faust, as told most famously by Marlowe and Goethe, and set to music, as Bob shared with us, by Godot. This cautionary tale warns humans that these deals always come with strings attached. Often the item most desired brings more trouble than it's worth. Having everything we want cannot inoculate us against strife and grief. Depending on the version of the tale, it sometimes ends with the devil coming to collect, and sometimes the faith of a loved one or the grace of God himself sets the bargainer free. And of course, in even later versions of the story, a lawyer uses the power of human reason to find a loophole in the spiritual contract, which lets the Faustian character off the hook. Throughout history, this belief in actual, literal demonic forces opposing God's will for goodness and truth has had devastating real-world consequences. The Inquisition in Europe and the witch trials in North America are just some of the examples. And this belief has not gone away. Here I'm going to insert myself into the story. The year is 1989. The satanic panic is raging in the middle of the country, and I am part of a fundamentalist Christian faith, and so are most of my friends. We are taught that everything that is happening, from drugs to gangs to an early attempt at marriage equality, is all the result of actual demonic forces taking control of us and fighting against God's angels for control of our culture and our society. I remember my friends and I would read these novels. I always loved reading fantasy novels, but these were definitely set in this Christian cosmology. And I remember one in particular was called This Present Darkness. And in this present darkness, it was the forces of the New Age that were coming to take people away from God's true church. And in one scene, all these famous New Age spiritual leaders, as well as media creators, were all in one space. And one of the characters was so obviously described to be George Lucas. Because apparently the force was actually the force of evil. And I have to say, friends, that's where they lost me. Because there was no way you were going to convince me that Star Wars was a path to the dark side when the opposite was obviously the message of the movies. But it was hard to break out of that when the entire culture was like that. And I would love to say that that has gone away. The Satanic Panic, if you're not familiar, was a movement in the late 80s and 90s in America, and then it spread to other parts of the world, the belief that there were groups of Satan worshipers who were ritually abusing children. Does that sound familiar? Yeah, it has come through to QAnon today. And if you watch any of the right-wing content creators, I did it, so you don't have to. They will pull out all sorts of phrases in various thought leaders' ideas, and then try to map them onto biblical passages, to continue to say that the battle between conservatism and liberalism, that the battle between our rights to do what is correct and good for our bodies and to have someone else decide what is correct and good for our bodies, and many other of the current political challenges that we're facing, they will say all of it is actually a demonic and angelic battle for the soul of the country. The latest survey I could find was in 2021, and in that survey, 58% of Americans believed in a literal devil. So what is the advantage of having a devil? It's an explanation for evil in the world. Is an understanding of why bad things happen to good people? Is it an explanation for why there are animal predators and why our country is being attacked by acts of God? On the level of leadership, government, and corporations, is it a willingness to accept suffering and oppression as just part of the natural order? Is it not a way to excuse bad behavior? There is nothing more spiritually corrosive than blame. When we can offload our responsibility to someone else, then we don't have any work to do. The devil made me do it. Leadership teacher Margaret Wheatley writes, "We act as if simple cause and effect is at work. We push to find that one simple reason things have gone wrong. We look for the one action or the one person that created this mess, and as soon as we find someone to blame, we act as if we've solved the problem." A simple solution to complex and even wicked problems. This focus on this celestial good and evil. And some of us may still believe that there is a celestial good and evil. That is okay. But does it excuse the work we need to do here and now? I would argue no. Dr. John Ellerby writes, "The preoccupation with evil is itself a problem and detrimental to the spiritual path. The fear of evil evokes feelings of defense and judgment and causes people to focus on what they're afraid of and what they believe they must avoid, instead of focusing on love and what they hope to become. Placing attention on evil causes us to discriminate and feed the ego's desire to be right, rather than feeding the soul's desire to be free. We look for sources of problems and blame others when we should be investing in solutions and being part of the change." Thus ends his quote. If we choose to focus on love and what we hope to become, a focus on good rather than evil, then by what process do we discern what is good? How do we, as Unitarian Universalists, decide what it means to act morally. There's no book we hold in common to outline what behavior is desirable and what is proscribed. And if we did, we would have to ask whose interpretation of that book is supreme. But we don't all look to the same teachers for guidance either. So what do we hold in common? Shared values. These are values that we collectively, as an association, determined would be our focus. When we are leaning into them, we are serving love and the spirit of life. But when our desires are out of alignment with our values, we are, at the least, selfish, and at worst, on the path of sin or evil. Now, as a community, we are allergic to the word sin. It's one of those we would rather leave in the past, especially those of us who were harmed by the either-or thinking of our childhood faiths. So I hope you can hold gently this exploration of some real doozies. Most of us are familiar with what the Catholic Church named the 7 deadly sins: pride, greed, wrath, envy, lust, gluttony, and sloth. Now, we have all seen how these labels have been applied to keep people in their place or tell them not to want to change their situation. We have seen how we are told to not be arrogant when we're just trying to say what is good for us as pride. We've been told that not having enough is actually enough, and having it labeled greed. We've been told that all anger is inappropriate, that there is no such thing as righteous anger, and labeled it wrath. We have been told we can't want more, that it is fair that some people have and some people have not. And if you want what's not yours, it's envy. We've been told that we aren't supposed to have sexual desires at all, when really it's all about having them within a covenant. And it's been labeled as lust. Gluttony is not about what we want, it's about wanting more than our share. And sloth has been used to keep us working and working and working for the benefit of someone else, and being told that we don't have a right or a need to rest. I posit that our 7 UU values, and we didn't even do it on purpose, seem to actually work in contrast to these 7 deadly sins. We can't be too proud if we are pluralistic and believe that others' truth is equal to our own. We can't be too greedy if we are cultivating a spirit of generosity. We can't get too angry. Our wrath cannot overwhelm us if we put love at the center. We may want to envy what others have, but only to the point of creating equality. Lust is wanting more than is consented to, but in a reciprocal relationship, we are transformed. Gluttony cannot take hold as long as we remember that we are interdependent, that all of our resources belong to all of us. And finally, sloth doesn't exist if we have a just enough world so that everyone can have honorable work and earn enough to have time for rest. Are we going to lean in? Are we going to bring our values forward as we decide what is correct and good? Or are we going to let those outside of us label what we do to try to keep us from moving forward? This is our question. And we don't have to answer it on our own. Like everything else, we do it together. We hold each other accountable. We express to each other where we struggle. We give each other helpful advice, and we offload for each other so that we can all rest. The Reverend Sam Trumbore, a member of the Board of Trustees of our Unitarian Universalist Association, wrote a meditation on goodness, which I will end with this morning. Goodness is a means, not an end. Look within. Who can stop the hunger for more than we deserve? Who can prevent a jealous thought from urging us to protect our hearts? Who can ward off all the uncertainties that disturb the mind before we decide to act? Were perfection required to be good, all human existence would be a living hell. Believe otherwise. Embodying love is the endless means to be good. In each moment, love stands at our side, ready to be chosen. Choose wisely.